What's up? It's been a while, but I'm finally back with part 2 of the T-Splines tutorial. So I know it's been a while, and just going to do a little bit of an introduction. If you want to skip this, probably like 20 seconds from now, I guess, or there'll be a timestamp in the description. I travel a ton for work. I'm really sorry. The response to the previous tutorial has been incredible, which is why I'm going to make more of a priority to make these tutorials from this year onwards. So we're going to focus a lot on industrial design processes. I'm going to look at different ways you can do stuff, and if you leave comments with what you want to see me make a tutorial about, I'm going to take that on board too. So with that said, this is part 2 of the T-Splines tutorial. I'm going to go through how to get more detail out of your parts. So in part 1 we covered the basics, just the absolute basic stuff. This time around it's going to be more about how to get that finer information, make sure that your model is a lot cleaner. And so with that said, let's jump right in. Okay, so a few things. Before we get started, I'm going to break this tutorial into essentially chapters, so you can see little title screens, things I haven't done before. But we are covering a lot of stuff, and I want to give you timestamps so you can jump back and forth between them in the description below too. So before we get started, a couple things. I've already done my sketches here, so you can see I already have my secondary, my primary, and my wheel arch sketches to create the vehicle that I want underneath. One of the other things that I've done is I've changed my view cube to orthographic. Generally, I find with this kind of T-spline work that orthographic just makes life a little bit easier for some reason. You don't have to do that. You can work in perspective if you like, but this is how I'm doing it. You'll also notice that I'm currently using the UI preview for Fusion 360. It's a really awesome update to the user interface. Makes getting to the tools that you want to use the most in each workspace a lot faster, things are cleaner, and I just generally like it more. So with that said, I'm just going to hit create form. I'm going to jump into our create form, and just like we would with our previous design, I'm going to go with extrude and select my first line here. And before I even extrude it, I'm going to set my number of faces to 15. I find 15 to be the sweet spot with this kind of work. And make sure your spacing is set to uniform like mine. So I'm going to start to pull this out, basically approximately where I want the side panel to be. It's about here. Then hit OK. Now from this point onwards, we're going to be working in the box mode. So I'm going to go over to utilities and hit display mode and change that to box display. Now basically the difference between box display and your smooth display is exactly what it sounds like. Box display is showing you essentially the underlying geometry that creates your T-spline to give you that smooth form. And if you want to create clean T-splines, this is pretty much the only way to do it, working in box mode. It also gives you a much better idea of what you're going to get and also where things might go wrong too. So strongly recommend checking that out. So I'm going to hit OK. And the first thing I'm going to do is add a side profile. So no vehicle is flat on the sides here. They're all kind of tapered and curved, and it's something that I'm going to do. You'll also notice that I've customized my toolbar up here a bit. So I've added insert point, extrude, and faces, as well as a few other things. It just makes it easier to get to because I'm going to be using them a bunch. If you want to add things to the toolbar yourself, all you have to do is hover over them, hit those little 3 dots, and just put pin to shortcuts like it is there. Alright, so I'm going to use insert point, and I'm going to start about here and go to there. So it's quite an exaggerated taper on my vehicle, but I'm going for a kind of performance vehicle look, so things are going to be a little bit more extreme. With that done, I can just go ahead and double click that edge and hit delete because I don't need it anymore. Then I'm going to use my extrude tool, excuse me, not my extrude tool. I'm going to use edit form and double click that edge again, and holding down Alt on the keyboard or Option if you're on a Mac, grab that upward arrow and start to pull that in the direction that I want. And that looks about good, so I'm going to hit OK. Then I'm going to look at this from the right side, and now I can start to bring in that profile that I've drawn here. Now what I'm actually going to do is extend this to create a few extra faces as I go along there, and then I'm going to come back and clean this up at a later stage as we're working on it. It's just going to give me a little bit of extra stuff to work with in case anything goes wrong or I don't like the way things are looking. So I'm going to use insert point, And I'm going to start on my back end here. It seems I've accidentally clicked, so I'm just going to hit cancel and start again. So let's go insert point. Let's just zoom in a bit. And basically all I'm going to do is trace my sketch profile from earlier. So I'm just going through. And it really doesn't matter if you don't nail this, because you can come through and tweak it afterwards. It's not a big deal. So as I mentioned, I'm just going to go beyond that first part and just keep following that profile that I created earlier and hit OK. So that's brought through a profile. Then I can just double click on this and hit delete. And I'm going to double click on that top edge and use my edit form to start to give this a little bit of a taper. So grab that and start to do this to it. About there looks good. And I can hit OK. And I don't need this anymore, so I'm just going to switch my sketch off to make selecting this a bit easier. And switch my sketch back on. And next I'm going to start to put in the side profile. So once again, double click that edge, go to edit form, hold down Alt on the keyboard and start to pull that out. And I might just drop that a little bit like this to create that profile. And I'm going to use insert point again because I don't want this to be identical to what I have here. I want to create some additional form to my vehicle. So I'm going to get in a little closer. Oops, seems like I reselected something again. Let's do that again. So 1, and I'm going to straighten it out a bit. Not straight to the halfway point, but a little bit closer. Then hit OK, double click this, delete, I don't need that anymore. And I'll start doing some extra work to this. So once again, edit form, double click my edge, hold down Alt on the keyboard and start to pull that downwards. Then looking at this from the right side, I'm going to just flatten it out a little bit to start to give it more control, make life a little bit easier. I'm going to set my scale to 0.01. That basically flattens that whole edge out. And that looks like a good place for that. Hit OK. And now I'm going to add another point to this for some extra detail. So I'm going to start here and go to about here. Hit OK. Don't need that bottom edge either. And then using edit form on the keyboard again. Double click, probably guess what I'm going to do, Alt, pull it down. This time I'm going to make sure this is flat on the bottom. I'm going to come through and add a vehicle taper afterwards. So just set that to 0.01. Look at this from the side. And I'm going to just bring that in a little bit. Now, the profile is looking a little goofy to me. It's not perfect. I'm going to grab this edge line here. And again, looking at this from the front, it looks a little too flat. So I'm just going to pop that out. Just a hair, not too much. And grab that inner edge that I made earlier and just bring that to about there. All right, that's looking good. I've got a profile on my vehicle. I'm going to hit OK. The positioning seems pretty decent to me, but if I wanted to move it, that's as simple as going to edit form again and using body, and I can just grab this and start to push it in and out. Actually, might just put it there a little bit further out. Now, if you look at this, you can see that I'm touching my wheels, but I haven't fully extended to them. That's because I'm going to do the wheel arches afterwards. So let's wrap this up so we've got the basic form before we start to put a little bit more detail in. So I'm going to go to symmetry and we're going to use mirror duplicate, and that's the body we're going to duplicate, and this is going to be the mirror plane. So I'm just going to hit OK on that. And now we're going to bridge this across to create our general form for the vehicle. So at this stage, a lot of people will bridge the entire thing, including the bottom side. Now, specifically because we're looking at a car, I'm not going to do the underside because that's something I'm going to worry about later once I've got the general form. Now, at this stage, it's really up to you. Do you want to put the base on or do you not? Are you making this as a toy car? Or are you just doing this as a tutorial, whatever it is? For me, I'm just going to put the 3 faces on. I'm not going to worry about the bottom. So let's grab that edge, hold down Shift on the keyboard, grab that edge, and you can see it's highlighting the other side in yellow to let you know that it's picked that side too. And then I can hit bridge. And it's not like that because it's symmetrical. I should have remembered that. Slight differences between how T-Splines work and how regular bodies work. So instead, while it still says side 1, I'm just going to double click along here, double click along here, double click along here. And then I'm going to set side 2. So let's... Excuse me. Let's try that one more time. So we're going to go to bridge. So that's the first edge. That's the second edge. That's the third edge. Side 2. Excuse me. Now this is good to know. This is one of those errors that sometimes gets thrown up by double clicking stuff. I've gone through that too quickly, and so it thinks I'm trying to pick something that I can't, which is why it's not working. So let's be a little bit more methodical about that this time round. So bridge, 1 edge, and then let's just add the rest of that in. And now let's click where it says side 2 and start pulling that round. Now I've got preview activated, so it's going to try and start adding that all in. So I'm just going to switch preview off for a second and make sure I'm just grabbing everything I need. I got 1, 2, 3, 4. Everything's looking good. I can see my 2 direction arrows are in place. Now I can set the preview to see how that's going to look. Okay, that's good. I'm going to use 4 faces and hit OK. Now with that done, I have my general form. Obviously, there's a lot of detail missing around the front and the back. But by using that mirror duplicate and then bridging across, I actually have a symmetry line. If I deactivate my sketches, you see I have my symmetry line there. So if I grab, for example, this chain of faces here and hit edit form. Oh yeah, this is really important to note. This is one of those things that might catch you out. When you're using the selection filters in edit form, this is something that I still to this day keep forgetting about. If you have your selection filter set to something, it's going to remember that. So because the last one I used was body, and what I've done here was selected a single face, when I hit edit form, it's going to deselect that because it's assuming that you want it only wants to let you pick a whole body. What I want is all. So with that set of faces selected, you can see I can just start to edit them together. So that's the first chapter bit done. Pretty good so far, right? Okay, so next up is going to be adding some more detail to this and showing you how to do stuff like the wheel arches. So the first thing I want to do is tweak my profile a little bit. So it's way too flat on the front. And that's as simple as just double clicking on this edge and hitting delete, and that's going to bring that down. Now I'll worry about getting the form and the side profile right later on, but there's a couple things that I want to tweak here. So I don't like the way that these edge lines are kind of profiling out, which is going to impact the vehicle design. So I'm just going to get rid of these 3, and I'm going to get rid of these 3 on the back as well. That's too much. And so first what I'm going to do is add a new set of insert points from here to about here. And that is going to give me a sharper looking profile that's going to look more like what I want the front of my vehicle to look like later on down the line. These edge lines are just going to make pulling that out a little bit easier. And I'm going to do the same thing to the back here. So I'm going to insert point, and I'm going to start here, and I'm actually going to flare these ones outwards a little bit like that. Okay. So now we're going to start putting some detail into this. First thing is going to be the front. So obviously it's way too flat on the front and the back, but that's by intent. So I'm just going to grab about this amount of edge line, and let's hide the origin so it's a little easier to see what I'm doing. And all I'm going to do is just pull that forwards to start to create the form that I want on the front of my vehicle. Then I'm going to grab these ones here and do the same thing. I'm just going to pull it out a little bit like that. I don't want it to be as exaggerated. I want kind of a point on the front of my car. And I'm not super thrilled about those corners either. So I'm going to just double click. That's a bit too much. Let's go from here to here. And again, looking at this from the top, I'm going to pull those back just a bit. And then grabbing just from here, pull that one just a touch as well. Okay, and that's starting to look a little bit more like what I want. And again, I can keep exaggerating this. Let's say, for example, you want to give it a kind of Lamborghini style front. All I would do is grab that point and pull that one inwards. And that's starting to look more and more like what you want, but I'm going to worry about that a little bit later. Going to the back, I'm going to do a similar thing. So I'm going to grab from about here to here and start to pull that one backwards, and then I'm going to do the same thing again with this group. Now, definitely look at this from the side because you want to make sure that you grabbed everything in the selection when you do that. You don't want to come back to this later and look at it and see that, oh no, you've actually only pulled the top and you didn't grab that bit too. And again, looking at this from the top, I can start to pull that a little bit as well. About there. Just creating a more interesting form with the vehicle. Again, the corners are way too kind of sharp. It just bluntly ends like that. So I'm going to grab from here just to the bottom. And once again, just pull this in a bit. I might rotate these ones a little bit too. That looks good. Just giving it a better form. And again, if I wanted to go with that more Lamborghini style look, if I grab these two and just once again looking at this from the side, just pull that in, and I can exaggerate that, almost create like a flared tail by doing the same thing with the top and just pulling that like that. Now's a good time to start to look at the profile of the vehicle. So looking at this from the front, from the side on, this was pretty good, but I'm not thrilled about that. It's way too sharp. So I can grab a point instead of the whole thing and start to just soften that a little bit. I might let's grab this guy and that looks good. Let's pull this down a little bit. Now looking at it from the front, it's obviously way too flat. We need to put a camber on this so it starts to look more and more like an actual vehicle. So again, I'm just going to grab these two here, this and this, and again looking at this, oops, lost it. Looking at this from the front, I can just pull those upwards and create a nice mild camber. Now it's looking a little funky at the back there, and again, just got to grab it and tweak it. A lot of T-Splines is looking around and just making sure that everything looks the way that you want it to look. If it doesn't, go back and start playing around with it some more and figure out what it is that you don't like about it. For example, looking at this, I might grab this point and just pull that in a little bit and start changing up the form of my vehicle more. Maybe I want to create, if I grab this point and start pulling this one outwards, it's going to start to create a kind of crazy pointed rear end. Now's a good time to also have a look at this in the smooth display. So I'm just going to hit OK and just press Control 3. and that's going to smooth everything out and you'll get that smooth view of your vehicle. This is looking pretty decent. Obviously it's not perfect and it's quite far removed from what you see in the box mode. But again, as we start to add more and more detail to this thing, it's going to start to make more and more sense and it'll feel more and more like what you want. Actually, looking at this in the smooth view, I can see that this is just a little bit odd. I'm not thrilled about that. So I'm going to grab that edge and just pull that inwards like this. Maybe rotate it a touch, and I'm going to grab that point and then again do the same thing. I'm just going to pull it in just a hair, and I might grab that and push that backwards like that. Alright, it's starting to look a little bit more like something you'd want to get inside and drive. So next up are the wheel arches. Okay, so for the wheel arches, there's a couple things we need to do first. First of all, I'm going to add that rear kind of taper that you see on a lot of vehicles. And once again, that's using insert point. So I'm going to start here, and I'm just going to move to about, let's go there. Hit OK. And obviously, because we have our symmetry on, it's reflected it on the other side. And then I'm going to use insert point again and just connect from this end to this end. Hit OK, and then I don't need any of this, so just go ahead and delete that. And now I've got that rear taper on my wheel and on the body. It's starting to look more and more like a car. And now for the wheel arch itself. So for the wheel arch itself, I need a little bit more data to work with. So I'm going to add an extra edge all along this line. I'm going to pull this upwards, and this is going to create a new position for me to grab my and create insert points with. So about there is good. Let's pull it just a touch higher. So next what I'll do is go to insert point and start drawing my wheel arch. So I want a bit of an exaggerated wheel arch, so I'm going to start here and just start drawing in what I want my wheel arch to look like. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, just so long as it starts to look at least resemble what you want. Obviously, like this area has gone a bit weird, so all I'm going to do is just hit insert point and just do that. Hit OK, and then I can get rid of these two. So before you actually start to create the wheel arch, obviously we're going to get rid of this stuff, but we want to make sure when we're done, get rid of this little guy here, that we have some clean geometry to work from. So looking at our edges, for example, this one, like that's a 5 edge, that's really no good. So I'm just going to weld the vertices there. I'm just going to grab that one and that one, clean that up. And then this 3 point, again, this is not ideal, so I'm just gonna get rid of that. Actually, we'll kill that there, and then I'm gonna get rid of this face and just create a whole new one. So I'm gonna use my face tool and go 1, 2, 3, 4, like that, and that's good. So obviously, like, that might look a little strange, but we're about to clean that up. It's not a big deal. So I'm going to use, grab that loop. So the way I did that was to just click on this one and then double click there. And notice that we have another dodgy element there. And I'm just going to weld those as well. Now you see, welding that, one of the things I forgot about is actually I have an edge line there. So I've got a couple ways of dealing with this. I can either just add another edge line in, so I don't have this, or I can get rid of that face and rebuild it. So I think I'm just going to go with insert point, and I'm just going to put a point in like that. Okay. Good time now to just hit Control 3 and look at this in smooth view. Obviously, that is no good there. That's gone horribly wrong. So if I go to Make Uniform, that's going to clean that right up very quickly for me. Super useful tool, Very, very neat trick to know. Hit Control 1 to go back to this view. Looking at this from the right, what I'm going to do is grab those edges and then go to my Edit Form tool. And using that same Alt trick, but this time I'm going to grab the scale line instead. And that's going to pull in some extra faces for me. Obviously that up there is a little bit too close, so I'm going to change my pivot point to my corner here. Confirm that. And then just grab the vertical scale and pull that down a little bit. Next up, what I'm going to do is just look at this from the front view and pull this to my desired position, which is about here, and then scale that flat, so that 0.01 trick again, and let's just pull that a little bit closer. Now obviously you might have noticed as we work through this that the dimensions look really, really small. That's because I'm still working from that MA chassis that we used in the previous tutorial. But everything that we do here is totally applicable to any other workflow you might use, so don't worry too much if you're concerned about anything there. So next what I'm going to do is start to edit the form, and I'm not going to look at the edges, but I'm going to start to grab these points and reform them to be basically where I want. Start to look a little bit more like my wheel arch. Obviously you don't want anything crashing into the wheel itself, which is why I'm pulling these up and around. And actually one thing I can do to make my life a little bit easier here is activate the sketches. So I can see where my wheel arch is. I'm going to grab my set of edge lines here. So from this loop through to here. And let's just make sure we got everything. That's not everything. And actually, you know what? I think just this is good. Pull that up just a touch like that. And then make sure that everything is where it should be. So just grabbing each one of those points. It doesn't matter too much. You may have noticed that with the previous tools, what I've been doing is grabbing only the vertical or the horizontally locked lines to pull my shapes around. With the wheel arch, it's not such a big deal. Really what you're looking for here is matching that profile that you've set up. That's kind of close enough. And then what I can do from here to make sure that it's exact is to go to modify and then down to pull. And I'm going to set this to select targets, but I'm going to grab my vertices first. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then my target is going to be that wheel arch. And that's now started to grab that profile a little bit more. If I look at this in smooth view, that's really, really close to what I want. Obviously, there's some stuff here that's not perfect, but again, we'll clean that up later. I'm going to run my make uniform operation again just to ensure that everything's nice and clean, looks good. Go back to box view, and now for the front of the wheel. Hey guys, so sorry about that. My webcam's crapped out, but let's keep going. So I went ahead and just created the front wheel arch already because there's no point in me repeating that. You basically saw how to do it in the front. Now I'm just going to check that everything's okay. So going back to my smooth mode and just verifying that everything looks clean. Doesn't look like I need to run a heel. So let's jump back to the box mode. Okay, so from here, this is a good place to start potentially adding some extra details in. We're going to go through additional detailing and more complex features in part 3, so don't worry if you feel like there's more to learn and I haven't covered it yet. But now I can just go ahead and start to get an idea of what that wheel arch is going to look like. I want to give it a kind of flared look, so I'm going through and I'm just kind of creasing around that edge line there just to make sure everything's looking nice and clean. It's the way I want it to be. And so just don't forget to make sure you select everything as you go through. And then I want a sharper look on my back end, so I've just creased that rear end there to give it more of that kind of accentuated spoiler look that I want without actually putting a full-blown spoiler on. And again, because I want this to have a kind of Lambo look, I'm going to start creasing that front as well to give it a kind of sharper definition. And again, in part 3, I'm going to go through how to really exaggerate these features and start to add more detailing in. That's looking pretty good. And now I can start to just check everything's cool. Yeah, pretty happy with that. I'm just going to tweak this a little bit to start to give this a little bit more of the profiling that I wanted. So I'm just pulling that forward to accentuate that front feature more, give it that sharper look. And then I'm going to smooth this area out a little bit as well, just making sure I don't grab, looks like I've grabbed slightly too many of the edges. So I'm just going to deselect that one. If you're having trouble deselecting it like I am right now, just go ahead and hold down Shift and then whoops, that's, Command, and then just grab everything. And now I can just start to smooth that detail out a little bit so it looks more how I want the profile to continue there. And that's looking pretty good. So just one more try, just to clean it up a little bit. Like, surface continuity is something that's really important and very conveniently something you can do most of the work by eyeballing. But that's kind of it for this tutorial. Hope it was worth the wait, and don't worry, part 3 is coming very, very soon. Alright guys, I hope you found that tutorial useful. Part 3 is coming very, very soon. I'm actually going to start recording it right now and should be up next week. Fingers crossed. Let me know what you thought. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you've got ideas for things that you want to see me tackle, don't forget to leave a comment below and I will make a tutorial about that. Catch you next time.